Hello everyone and welcome to Hannafin's first Excel webinar series. We host weekly webinars, but this is the first time that we've done a series like this, and we're really looking forward to hearing whether or not you guys enjoyed it today. So the very first subject, first session we're going to do is with Rachel Law, and it's fix these 5 common Excel issues to achieve pro status. My name is Jamie Newton, and I am the communications manager here at Hannafin, and I will be your moderator today. So as I said, your presenter is going to be Rachel Law. Rachel is a senior account analyst here at Hannafin. She is a PPC Hero blogger, and she also hosted an Excel workshop at HeroConf in Philadelphia this past April. So welcome, Rachel.
Thank you, Jamie. I'm so happy to be here with you all.
We're excited to have you. If you want to tweet at Rachel, you can at law_Rachel. If you want to join today's conversation, you can include the hashtag ThinkPPC in your Twitter tweets, or use the webinar question box right there on your control panel to send us questions. We will have a quick live Q&A at the end of the session, so as soon as you think of your question, go ahead and put it in there, and we will answer as many questions as possible before we are out of time. So just before we get started, we have a few housekeeping items. Who is Hannafin Marketing? We run the world's most popular PPC blog and conference, blog PPC Hero, conference HeroConf. As an agency, we manage and optimize clients' paid search, paid social, and display programs. It's our core objective to make everybody better at PPC, ourselves, our clients, our peers, which is why we do weekly webinars, we post on PPC Hero, and we release white papers frequently. So that's just a little bit more about us. For the clients that we work with, here's just a snapshot. We work with a lot of Fortune 500 companies, big brands. You'll see Weather Channel, Iceland Airshoe, Carnival highlights. So a lot of great people that we work with. You'll notice in the handout section right there on your control panel that we have some resources for you. Make sure you check that out. You can download those directly from the control panel. It's a white paper on 34 Excel tricks written by our own Rachel Law, the ultimate guide to Excel for PPC, and using Excel Solver for budgeting. All right, we have a quick poll question before we get started. So we want to know, how long have you been in PPC? Less than a year, 1 to 3 years, 3 to 5 years, or 5+ years. So if you'll take a moment and go ahead and fill that out, we'll be excited to see who's in our audience today. So Rachel, while they're filling that out, how long have you been in PPC?
I am coming up on my 3.5-year anniversary. I came to Hannafin as a fresh college graduate, PPC baby. Didn't know anything about PPC, but here we are today.
Perfect. Yeah, Rachel went through our training program and has progressed quite a lot and is now a senior account analyst. So very cool. All right, so who is in our audience? All right, it looks like our biggest group are the 1 to 3 years at 35%, but a lot of people at different levels throughout the board. That's awesome. So we're excited to have you guys on today and excited to get started. So Rachel, you want to take it away?
All right, here we go. So we will get the ball rolling here with just some common Excel errors. So if you're looking at this slide and you feel your blood pressure starting to rise a little bit, I can totally relate. We all hate it when we see these errors pop up in our Excel formula. It can be very frustrating, especially when we're working on, a big complicated formula. But don't worry, we're here to help. So that first one at the top is the name error. So that's where Excel doesn't recognize text that you've put in a formula. So what you want to do to fix this is just make sure you're typing your formulas correctly. Typos have a sneaky way of getting into your formulas, and that will more often than not give you an error. And it's also important to make sure that any text that you're typing in your formula is enclosed in quotation marks so that Excel will recognize it as text. And moving along, the value error is when you've put the wrong type of argument into your formula. So for example, if you're using a formula that needs to reference numbers and you've accidentally included a cell that has text in it, you'll get this value error. So the fix here is to use functions instead of operators. This can help a lot. So instead of saying cell C5 plus B5, use the sum formula. That can help a lot with these value errors. And then, as always, check that you're referencing the correct cells. So the middle error, divide by 0. Oh no, this isn't possible, but don't worry. The universe will not explode. Your laptop will not burn up. It's fine. You'll just get an error. I see this one a lot when people are calculating rates, like click-through rate, conversion rate, and you have zeros in there. So the fix here is to insert the if error function before that formula. So the if error function is really great. Super simple way to clean up your data, make it look really nice as well. All you do is just shove it in the beginning of your formula, and then after your formula, type in what you want it to return when there is an error. And the reference error. So a cell that the formula is referring to is not valid. This happens a lot if you've got a bunch of columns, you type in a formula, and then, whoops, you deleted a column that formula was referencing. Once you delete that column, Excel doesn't really know what to do, so it gives you this reference error. So after you delete that column, just go ahead and readjust your formula. All will be well. And then the very last one here is just the NA, not applicable error. So this is just where your formula did not find a matching value, and this is not always a bad thing. So if you use VLOOKUPs a lot, you'll find that this is kind of the normal response when it doesn't find a matching value. So this is a red flag, however, if all of your VLOOKUPs return NA, that probably means you have a problem with your formula. So you'll want to go back, and we'll get into VLOOKUPs here in a minute. But that's a red flag that you'll want to change your VLOOKUP. But most of the time, NA is not terrible. Don't panic. So moving on to the VLOOKUP. So here's just a quick snapshot of what this formula looks like. Very popular function in PPC. We use it all the time here in-house. So the common errors here, I have these red arrows pointing to the table array and the column index number arguments within the formula. So with table array, you want to make sure that you're selecting the entire table of data that you're using for your lookup. A big error I see a lot is people only selecting one column for the table array, and that's going to give you an error. So just make sure you're selecting all of your data. And then for column index number, this is the column number that contains the value that you want your VLOOKUP to return. So another error here is using 1. In Excel, if you put a 1 here, and for example, you've selected only one column in your table array, it's going to give you an error because VLOOKUP is looking for a wide range of columns to look at. So here is a quick example. So you notice here we're using the VLOOKUP formula to return the number of ads for these campaigns. And we're looking up from the table to the right, so that box in red. So what's the issue here? Well, remember we said that we want to select the entire array that we're looking for. And we only have one column selected. So columns E and F should be selected here. So we want to return that number of ads, but we don't have it selected in our formula, so Excel can't return that value. So if you do get an error in one of your cells, Excel is here to help. So you will notice this somewhat alarming, scary yellow-orange triangle here pop up. So if you're really stuck, you can click that and either click Help on this error, Trace error, Ignore error. And this is an example of the trace error. So depending on how complicated your formula is and what kind of formula it is, this may or may not be helpful, but it will draw a little diagram showing you which cells that formula is referencing. So this might be helpful if you think you're pulling in the wrong columns, the wrong cells. Go ahead and click that trace error and see if you've got any red flags here. Again, if your formula is super complicated, this might be more confusing rather than helpful, but it might be worth looking into. And if you do click the help with error button, Excel will open a little pop-up that gives you some information for the type of error. You can link to Microsoft's help site if you get really stuck. That's a good option, rather than just trying to redo your formula a million times. I've been there. It's not very fun, but it happens. So the next topic here that we use a lot in PPC, everyone loves them for good reason, pivot tables. They are awesome. However, and I see this pretty frequently in people who are newer to PPC, newer to Excel, just not used to it. So you would think that if you're pulling, say, data from a campaign report and you have click-through rate as a column, so you might think, oh, I can just take an average of the click-through rate and that'll be good. Wrong. Sorry to say it, but you'll have to use a calculated field. But it's not too tricky. You just go in, add that calculated field, divide your clicks and impressions, and you'll notice here that the two numbers are quite different, especially for that top row there. The average of the averages is about 12%, while the actual value is 8%. So you'll just want to make sure you use that calculated field to get the most accurate data. Index match. So index match is a really, really great alternative to VLOOKUP. There are lots of benefits. It's faster. It doesn't look at as many columns. If you've got a lot of data, you'll probably want to use index match because VLOOKUP can be a little clunky with huge data sets. While it is very useful, it's pretty easy to get things mixed up. So we'll go through the functions here. So index returns a value when you specify a row number and a column number. So your array is the cells where Excel should be looking. And then row and column number are just, again, the number of the row and the number of the column. Match, on the other hand, returns a row number for the value you specify. So you tell Excel, hey, I want to look up this value. Tell me what row number it's in. So very similarly, the lookup value is what you're searching for. The array is where you're searching. And then this match type function, it is optional, but I do see a lot of problems with this sometimes when you are looking up values. So here at Hannafin, something we like to do for our clients for bidding specifically, so we will set up a bid table using metrics like impression share, conversions, or CPL, and we use an index match to automatically look up, based on those two metrics, what the bid change should be. So for your match type, if you leave it out altogether or put 1, it will find the value that's less than or equal to the lookup value. While if you put -1, it will look up the value that is greater than or equal to. So this can be important, say, you know, if you're looking up a bid and you don't want to overbid or underbid. So you'll just want to pay attention to what match type you're using and use the one that makes the most sense for your particular use case. And then 0 will find the value that is exactly equal to. So if you're looking up text, that's a great one to use. So putting it together, here's our index, which is our leading formula here. We're going to nest the match in the index. So match just takes the place of the row number argument within the index function. And another mistake I see a lot is people just getting these sort of flip-flopped and trying to put the match in the column number. Order matters here, so just remember that for index it's always row before column. And then if you're using a more complicated index match with more than one criteria, this is a great way to do it. So you'll notice this one looks a little bit different. Within our match function, you're actually looking up the value 1. And then if you look here, what we are matching that one to is actually two different arguments multiplied together. So here we want to look for a cell that matches the utilization and a cell that matches the new account capacity. This example was pulled from an internal document we use to do account assignments for account managers here. So when Excel finds a match for both of these criteria within the array, it will return a 1. So that's why when we use the match, we specify 1 instead of specifying a more specific utilization account capacity. These take some practice, but totally worth it once you get the hang of it. Cell references. This one is a bit more uncommon, but it still sometimes happens, and when it does, it can be very frustrating trying to figure out why your numbers don't add up or why they're not accurate. So here we see that this COUNTIF function is referencing a cell that is way below it down there. Why is that happening? That should not be happening. It should reference the one directly to the left. So whoops, the data was filtered. You'll notice we have the filters in the column headers, but the formula didn't quite get the memo, unfortunately. So the fix here is just to use named ranges. So named ranges, if you ever talk to me about Excel, I always advocate using them. They come in handy in so many different ways. But this is one of those use cases where it can definitely pay off to have them set up. So here, instead of referencing the actual cell, we have named the range for all the campaign names. So in our formula, we just type in campaign, and Excel knows where to look in that column. And Excel will not get as confused when you use these name ranges. Filter your heart out. Excel will love you. So for our key takeaways here, we'll keep it short and sweet. Use those named ranges whenever possible. They will make your life 1000% easier. Also, when you're sharing your workbooks with your coworkers, clients, colleagues, it's much easier to understand what those formulas are doing when you're using named ranges. So use them. 2, double check your arguments and their order. Whenever I get errors in Excel, my first step is to go back and double check the formula. Am I referencing the right things? Do I have the order right? I can't tell you how many times I've messed up the order and had to redo it. 3, use Excel help if you do get errors and you're stuck, don't know quite what to do. Excel's there to help you. If that doesn't help, you can always Google. Google's great for finding answers to pretty much anything. And then for pivot tables, again, make sure you're using those calculated fields. Your numbers will not be correct if you don't, for things like click-through rate, conversion rate. So use them, because I don't want you to have wrong data. That would make me very sad. So do it. And that wraps it up.
Rachel, which one do you see happen the most frequently?
Oh, VLOOKUP errors. Very frequently.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
But luckily, that's a pretty easy one to fix. Just takes some practice.
Awesome. Well, thank you for the great presentation, Rachel. Before we go on to live Q&A, we got a couple of things we're going to tell you about. So if you have questions, go ahead, put those in there, and we will answer as many as we can. So this is just a little bit of about our conference, HeroConf, which is going to be in Los Angeles. HeroConf is the largest all PPC conference in the world. So that's paid search, paid social, programmatic, display, mobile, etc. There's a lot of great speakers and an all-around very fun event, which I think Rachel can attest to, and me as well. So check that out. If you've never heard of it, go to the site, heroconf.com, click the LA. We also have one in London every year as well. We just wrapped that up this past October. We'll be back in London in 2017. So check that out. All right, we have a quick offer for you guys. Here at Hannafin, we know that working with an agency, any agency, can be a really scary thing. when you work with one, there's certain things that you need to keep an eye on. So we put together a list of signs that will help you determine whether your agency is throwing out any red flags. A red flag that we often see here at Hannafin in potential client conversations is that the business doesn't have access to their Google AdWords account or their Bing Ads account or any other AdWords accounts. That's a big red flag. And if you don't have account access, you need to talk to your agency.
Guys, run for the hills if you don't have access to your own account. You should absolutely have access.
So, as an agency and knowing and seeing these signs and hearing some of these other kind of not so great stories about what's happened to other clients, we just want to make sure that everybody is aware that you know what to look out for. So if you'd like that, we'll send you a free copy via email. Go ahead and check that. Yes, I'd like a copy. If not, just click no thanks. Totally cool. All right. We'll keep that up for just a tidbit, and we'll go on to the live Q&A. So let's see what questions we have here from our audience.
Let's see. So we have one for, do we have to use calculated fields also for average position? So for average position, I usually just take the average of this one. So when you're building your pivot table, you'll drag the average position into your pivot and then just change it from sum to average, and that'll give you a nice average.
Okay, thank you. Okay, next question. Google Sheets versus Excel Sheets has a query function. Is there a comparable Excel function?
So I've been using Google Sheets a lot lately. Specifically, I don't know if you guys have heard of Supermetrics, but it's a pretty easy way to pull data automatically into Google Sheets. I don't think I have used the query function, but I will say that there definitely are gaps between Google Sheets and Excel. Excel is definitely much more robust than Google Sheets in some instances, and you might run into some weird things trying to pull from Google Sheets into Excel. So that's another thing to just watch out for when you're using both.
Perfect. All right. It looks like that's all the questions that we have for today. So thank you everybody for attending this session. We do have 2 more sessions coming up today. The next one will be on search query reports with Elena Thompson. But if that's all you're joining us for today, thank you. We're so glad you attended. If you're sticking with us, we're going to take a short break and switch our presenters, and we will be back at 1:30. Okay?
There's great content coming up, so I hope everyone sticks around. You won't want to miss Elena and Jacob Fairclough, which we call him Secret Jake, if that adds to the mystique of the webinar. All right, thank you, everybody.
Thanks. Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the Excel series. We are on our second session of the day, and give me 1 second. I'm going to share my screen so you can see it. All right, can everybody see my screen now? Okay, good to go. All right. So our second session of the day is Excel your search query reports with these must-have tips. I'll be your moderator. My name is Jamie Newton, and I am the communications manager here at Hannafin. And your presenter today is Elena Thompson. She is an account manager at Hannafin, a PPC Hero blogger, and she was also the Excel workshop instructor for HeroConf London, which just happened this past October. Hello, Elena. How are you doing today?
Good, Jamie. Thanks for having me.
Good. We're excited to hear about your presentation.
Yeah, I'm always pumped for Excel.
If you want to tweet at Elena, you can at Elena P. Thompson. All right, we're going to go through a quick few housekeeping things real quick. If you want to join the conversation, include the hashtag ThinkPPC in your Twitter tweets, or send us your questions through the question box on the panel. A quick thing about who Hannafin is, we run the world's most popular PPC blog and largest PPC conference, that is PPC Hero and HeroConf. We manage and optimize global paid search, paid social, and display programs, and within 12 months, brands can expect a 250% increase in their growth trajectory. Here's a brief look at our clients. Weather Channel, Iceland Air, Shoe Carnival. We work with a lot of awesome big brands. Okay, a quick poll question. So, are you doing PPC analysis on a Mac or PC? This is just a quick thing to see what our audience is using. Elena, what do you use?
Well, for Hannafin, we all use Macs, which was quite a shift for me. I came from having a personal PC and then also teaching a business course at the business school here at Indiana University, and they all use PCs, and they actually don't recommend using Macs just for the Excel work that we were doing. So I kind of use both, but lately I've been using a Mac.
Perfect. All right, let's see. Oh, a good chunk of our audience is using PC. Okay, great to know. Welcome, everybody. Thanks for joining us. All right, without further ado, Elena, take it away.
Awesome. Thanks, Jamie. We'll just go ahead and jump into the agenda for today. So I'll briefly just tell you how I came about this pivot table process for my search query reports, and then we'll get into some step-by-step solutions for your SQRs, along with an example of keyword expansion versus an example of limited spend, and how you would adjust your pivot table to give you that information. So we'll just go ahead and jump into the reason why I got started with these search query reports via pivot tables in Excel. So my first few months at Hannafin, I was pretty new to PPC, and some of the first tasks that were assigned as we're learning are search query reports. And I feel like this GIF is really shows my emotions after my first few search query reports. I was just very, very frustrated, and it felt like everyone else was completing their tasks at light speed compared to how long it took me to do a search query report. And as a lot of you know, one of the reasons for that is because when you download search terms from AdWords, you end up with potentially thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of search terms, depending on your company size and how many campaigns you're looking at, as well as the date range. But in general, I was ending up with, as you can see in this image, about 20,000 rows. And anyone that uses Excel, whether it's on a PC or a Mac, you know that a certain number of rows eventually slows down Excel and occasionally makes it crash. So that was really frustrating, and it was also just really easy to get lost in this quantity of data. And the more rows that you have, I feel like the easier it is to have room for error, and you end up overlooking search queries because you get a little bit overwhelmed with how much data there is. So I finally got to the point where I went to my supervisor and I said, I just can't do this anymore. There's got to be a better way. Please help me. I don't know if I'm just incredibly slow or if there's a much simpler way to do this. And my supervisor kindly showed me the simpler way to do this, which is the Excel pivot table. So we'll just jump into kind of why this is a better solution than just sorting and filtering thousands of rows, and then we'll jump into the step-by-step. So unfortunately, since this is a webinar, I can't tell if you guys are chuckling with me, but I really like Friends, and anytime I say anything on the blog about an Excel pivot table, I reference this moment.
It's a good moment, Elena.
Yeah. So if you guys haven't watched Friends, I highly recommend watching this clip on YouTube. But pivot tables are really, really awesome in terms of PPC analysis overall, but especially for your search query reports. So some of the benefits that I've listed here are that your pivot tables aggregate the data that you have. So instead of having a search term when you download it from AdWords, it could be listed multiple times within all of those rows you've downloaded because it could have matched to a variety of keywords in your account. And every time there's a new match or a new combination of search term and keyword, it gets listed in a separate row. So like I said, one search term could appear 10 times, which just exponentially adds to the amount of search queries that you have, whereas a pivot table can aggregate all of those terms into one clean row. And then, like I said, it's clear and simple sorting. When you're sorting and filtering on an Excel doc with thousands of rows, like I said, it often makes Excel angry, and your Excel might shut down before you have saved, or you just get really lost in all of that data. So you're eliminating all the rows of scrolling, and you can also find multiple takeaways from the same set of data. So like I said before, we're going to go through 2 step-by-step processes, and one pivot of the same set of data can show you how to increase your spend because of the search queries you have, or it can help you to eliminate wasted spend. So we're going to start by looking at a pivot table that is specifically for expansion. So you need to go into AdWords. You could also go into Bing, although some of you know that there's slightly less metrics in Bing, but in this case you could find all of these numbers in Bing. So we're going to grab all of these columns and just make sure that you have the search term as well as the keyword in there. And if this is an e-commerce account, you're probably going to want your total conversion value, also known as your revenue, if your goals are return on ad spend oriented. If you're working with a lead gen account, you're probably going to want to be able to calculate cost per lead, meaning you would need your cost and your conversions, which we also have here. So like I said, I generally use these pivots for 2 different types of SQR reporting: keyword expansion or limited spend. We're going to go through keyword expansion, but in either situation, it's really helpful to have some sort of column or label that tells you if the word that you're looking at match to a branded keyword or non-branded keyword. And so if you don't already have brand as a label with maybe just as a keyword label or as a part of your campaign naming convention, then I would go ahead and add it. So this is what you would do if you don't already have brand in your campaign. You can download all of this data from AdWords and then add another column to that, and then sort your campaigns by brand or ad group, or sort to find the branded situations, whether that's in your campaigns or your ad groups. So in this case, you can see in the drop down that I have all of the campaigns from this account have branded in the name. So I've selected just those campaigns, and then in my new column that I've added, I'm basically creating a label, but it's just not an AdWords label, it's just for my Excel sheet. And I'm going to fill brand down for that entire section of campaigns that are branded, and then for all of the rest, I'll add a non-brand label, and that will help us with the analysis moving forward. So then the next step is just going to be selecting all of your data and creating the pivot table. So a really nice Excel shortcut is just to hit Control A, and that works on a Mac or a PC. It will select all of the consecutive, or all of the cells with data that are located next to each other, or consecutive. And then you can just, on a Mac, you would go to Insert, Pivot Table, as you can see in the top. And then from there, we start to build out our pivot. So we are looking at search terms that generate revenue or leads, because like I said, we're looking to expand in this scenario, and this is an e-commerce client. So we want to look for search terms that are currently meeting or exceeding the return on ad spend goal that this client has. So we start with our filters, which you can see in the top left. Just a side note, if you're unfamiliar or relatively new to pivot tables, this is called the builder, and you have 4 different pieces to your builder. The top left is filters, and then you have columns, rows, and values, and these are all located in the same position within the builder as they are in the actual pivot. So in the top left are your filters, and in the top left of the actual pivot are the filters. And then your rows are on the far left, columns are on the top, and then your values are everything that falls in between the rows and the columns. So all of that being said, I'm looking for expansion opportunities in this situation. So I have pulled the campaign and the match type into filters. The reason being, if I'm looking for expansion, I'm probably not going to find that within my branded campaigns. Your brand, you should have all of the keywords that are related to your brand in that campaign, and there's very unlikely that you've got some sort of broad match word that's converting in there that you didn't already have as an exact keyword. So I filtered the campaign to exclude all of the branded campaigns, or if you use that new label that you just created in the last step, you could sort that way as well. And then we're also only looking at the broad match types. So the reason being there, if a keyword, or I'm sorry, if a search term exactly matched to a keyword, then you already have that keyword in your account and you can completely own that bid and control the bid. If a search term matched broadly, then you clearly don't have that exact search term in your account, and maybe you want to add it so that you can control that bid a little bit more and expand the account that way. So we're only looking at broad matches, and this is what we get so far. So if we're looking, we put our search term into the rows section, which looks like this. And I've done a lot of finding and replacing with these values and search terms, so these are probably search terms. If you look through them, a lot of them may not make sense because I wanted to keep the data private, but we also have the values over here. So we have our impressions, our conversion values, and our cost. So right now we have a ton of words, search terms that only came through once because they were incredibly specific search terms. So we want to clean this up a little because we don't need to spend time in a search query report on search terms that only had one impression. The odds of that search term appearing again in the account are slim to none. So we're going to eventually filter out a lot of those search terms that didn't have the impressions. First, though, we want to know if these search terms are meeting goals. That's one way to kind of filter through this data. So we're going to add a calculated field based on goals. Like I said, this is an e-commerce example, so we're going to look at return on ad spend. If you're lead generation, you might be looking at cost per lead. So when you, on a Mac, it's the double click on your mouse pad, or if you just right click on, I believe on regular PC, you would right click and you can add, as you see here, you can add a formula and a calculated field. And then what that's going to look like is this, at least on a Mac, but you should have the same options within a PC. And when you add that calculated field, it's just going to let you create a formula based on fields that you already have. So return on ad spend in this case is my conversion value field divided by my cost. And that's going to be called return on ad spend, and that gets added into the pivot that I have. So from there, we want to sort by that goal so that I can see which search terms are actually meeting that goal. And you can see here in this pivot table, if you want to sort these search terms, you have to use this button up here at the top, and then you'll get these two options, sort and filter. For sort, we're, like I said, descending by goal, so I can see at the very top which search terms are exceeding the goal and which ones, the ones that are not exceeding the goal will be towards the bottom. So you can see that that's working so far. In this screenshot over on the far right, we have all of the incredibly high return on ad spend search terms. However, you can see that the reason that those return on ad spend are so high is because the impressions were between 1 and 5, which is very insignificant statistically, and we don't really want to bet on the fact that, for example, Nike Boys Flex Experience Running Sandals Red, that should be an exact search term in the account. It's incredibly specific. It's only had one impression. So really, it's not worth our time right now because it's not likely to happen again. So instead, we want to, like I said, filter out these low impression search terms. But we don't want to use the filter that's in the builder. We actually want to go back to this drop down that we have here that's in the search terms section of the pivot, and we're going to use the filter there. And we have two options, filter by label or filter by value. So I'm filtering by value, and I'm saying I want impressions to be greater than 30. I'm doing this in this section because now that all of this data is in the pivot, everything is aggregated for these search terms. So if, for example, Converse for Kids had 2,700 impressions, so that had to be more than one user out there that was searching for that. And that means that probably appeared multiple times in the report that I downloaded from AdWords, but it could have, that search term could have matched to multiple keywords. Since I put it into the pivot, all of those times that it happened are now aggregated into one row. So now that it's aggregated, that's when I want to filter by values. You don't want to use numeric values in the filter that's in the pivot builder, which we already used in previous steps. So we're going to filter by values greater than 30 so that we have some statistical significance. And you could always change that number based on how big the account is. But now you can see all of these search terms have been searched for multiple times, and while cost was still pretty low for some of these, you can see, for example, Converse for Kids had the most impressions, $80 worth of cost, which certainly means it's been clicked multiple times, but at the end of the day that brings us to return on ad spend that's less than 100%. So that's probably not somewhere that I would want to expand in the account. That's really up to you. But the point of these pivots is to quickly show you the highest performing and the lowest performing keywords so that you don't waste your time looking at thousands of rows. And so here we have 6 search terms with significant return on ad spend that maybe could be added to the account depending on how much you want to expand and how many long tail keywords you want to have in the account. So that is the expansion example. We're now going to move into a limited spend example, but since we already worked through the creation of the pivot, we're just going to walk through what you would add to your builder. So here you can see we're kind of looking at the opposite. We want to look for search terms that have high cost and are not meeting goals at all. I still have the same filters, the campaign and match type, although this time, because I'm looking to save money, I'm including all of my brand campaigns as well. And then I'm still looking at broad match terms because those should be the first place that you would want to clean up your search terms, because obviously if it's an exact match, you put that keyword into your account for a reason. So again, we have still included the return on ad spend column, but what I've done is I've moved it to the top of the values that are listed within the builder. So now it's in the first column, and then when I sort, I'm sorting by cost descending so I can see the most expensive words at the top, and then I'm filtering by labels, which I'm filtering by values that are less than or equal to 2. What that's doing is filtering by the sum of the, filtering by the return on ad spend that's less than or equal to 200%. And so you can see all of these search terms had either 0% for the most part or less than 200% of return on ad spend, and they had some sort of cost, although a lot of them are not too high. As you can see in the far right column over here, the highest we had was $80, which is where we had that less than 100% return on ad spend. So these are search terms that you might want to, if they were higher cost, I would probably add these as negatives in the account. It's your call at what point of cost do you add these as a negative. But if you really are limiting your budget, then you might want to start limiting some of these broad search terms from your account if they don't seem to convert. All right, so we just want to walk through some of these takeaways. You should definitely use pivot tables to aggregate your search term statistics across an entire account or set of campaigns. In addition, pivot tables eliminate the need to look at every row of an AdWords search query download. And finally, when you create custom columns and use filters, you can see which terms are truly meeting your account goals, and not only that, but you can do it very quickly. And that is all that I wanted to cover for today.
Perfect. Well, thank you, Elena. We have a lot of questions coming in, but real quick, before we get into the live Q&A, I just want to tell you a little bit about HeroComp if you've not heard this yet. So we will be going to Los Angeles in April for HeroConf, and HeroConf is the largest all PPC conference in the world. So it's paid search, paid social, programmatic, display, mobile, etc. Lots of great speakers, a very fun event. As I said earlier, Elena just ran the Excel workshop in London, which was in October. It'll be in October again in 2017. And we will have another Excel workshop at HeroConf LA. So if you are interested in that, go to HeroConf.com, click the LA section, and you will be able to see all the programming that we have available and then speakers as they come available. All right, so as I mentioned in the very first session is at Hannafin, we know how scary it is to work with an agency. There are certain things you need to look out for when you are working with an agency, and we've put together a list to let you know, how to determine if the agency you're working with or are planning to hire is throwing out any red flags. One of the things that we notice as a business in our potential client conversations is that they do not have access to their Google AdWords account or their Bing Ads account. And that's a very big red flag for us because you should always have that transparency and you should always be able to get access into your own account. So if you don't have account access right now, make sure you get that. That's a big deal. Okay, we'll keep that up for just a little bit, and we will go on to the live Q&A. So, Elena, what is our first question?
Yeah, so we actually had a few questions about the version of Excel that I was using, and I definitely should have mentioned that from the start. But like I said, we work on Macs here at Hannafin, but recently we updated to Office 365 Pro. So I thought that was the best version to use for you guys because Office 365 is becoming the next generation of Microsoft Office because we get those automatic updates. And I know at the university that I work for, they're also moving to Office 365 in the next couple of years. So there's going to be a lot more similarities between what would be considered a Mac version versus a PC version of Excel. And the Mac version already looks a lot more similar than what I'm used to, or yeah, a lot more similar than to the PC version. So, and if anything, the Mac version tends to be the least improved, I guess you could say. The Microsoft version on a PC was always, of course, the most up to date. So I felt like if we use the Mac version, if you guys are watching and you're using a PC, chances are your steps are actually going to be simpler than what I had to go through to do the same actions on a Mac. All right, so there's another question that's, I think, really good. What is the best date range to use for your SQR? 30 days, less, more? So this is dependent upon the traffic in the account. If you are an e-commerce client, or you're working for an e-commerce client, or you're an e-commerce company, generally 30 days is more than enough data to work with. However, lead generation campaigns and accounts tend to have higher value product and thus less conversions to work from. And so it's harder to get a true understanding of what the cost per lead is without taking 3 to 6 months of data. So make that date range decision based on how much data you have so that you can so that you're really pulling a statistically significant set of data versus maybe a lead gen account that only had 2 really large conversions in the last 30 days. That's really not going to help you optimize too much. So let's see. There's a lot of great questions, you guys. I'm trying to figure out where to go. One that I think is interesting that we didn't cover is which analysis could be done using pivot tables. So aside from doing your search query reports, another situation where we do pivot tables is like a time of day analysis or a geographic analysis. Any of those large pieces of, or large sets of data that you can download from AdWords from the Dimensions tab. When you download them, they often end up being thousands of rows, but when you aggregate them all together, you can see, across 6 months, if it's your time of day, you can see in general at 1 o'clock, our cost per lead is this, our return on ad spend is this, because you're aggregating those hours. Or same thing with geolocations across multiple campaigns. Do we have time for another question?
We have time for a real quick question. And then we'll need to get ready for Jacob Fairclough's presentation.
Great. All right. You guys have so many good ones. I'm trying to make sure we pick one that applies to a lot of us. Let's see. All right, the final question. Why would this approach to search query analysis be better than something like a script where it analyzes the performance of queries at the term level? For example, queries with Amazon and then perform poorly. This allowed you to block bad traffic before they become significant in the query level. That's a great question. Scripts are awesome, and I'm not going to deny that. But one reason I think these search query reports are great is because they're easy to do. Scripts are a little bit more tedious if you're not used to them and implementing them. But yeah, if you have time for scripts, those are great. The only other thing is I think sometimes these analyses are better with a personal touch. Scripts don't always understand the context of a product or a service or the mindset of your audience. So if you think that you have a basic enough product or a basic enough campaign, maybe a script could help you in that situation. But I think sometimes you need a personal touch when you're looking at these search queries to know, okay, my client, while that by a script's definition would be great for our account, I actually know that our client doesn't want to associate with that search term for reasons X, Y, and Z. So yes, scripts are great, but if you feel like you have a very specific product, it's nice to have a personal touch on your search query reports. And I think that's all we've got.
That's all we've got time. Thank you, Elena, so much. I'm sorry to all of you that we did not get to your question. We had a lot of great questions come in and just did not have the time to get to all of them. As you'll see on your screen right now, if you do have questions that you need help with, you can either send us an email at marketing@hannafinmarketing.com or feel free to tweet at Elena P. Thompson. All right, we will get started in just a couple of minutes with Jacob Fairclough's presentation. So we're going to take a real quick break and get him in here, and then we will start up in just about 2 or 3 minutes. Okay, thank you everybody that joined us today, and we'll see everybody else that's planning to stick around. And hey everyone, welcome back again. We are on our final session of the Excel webinar series, and we are going to be talking about how to discover more accurate projections with Excel data tables. Last time you have to hear all my spiels. My name is Jamie Newton. I'm the communications manager, and I am your moderator today. And your presenter for this session is Jacob Fairclough, who we lovingly call Secret Jake here at Hannafin. He is a senior account analyst and a PPC Hero blogger. Hey, Jake.
Hello.
Thanks for being with us.
Well, thanks for having me.
Yeah.
I'm excited to talk about data tables today.
If you want to tweet at Jake, you can tweet at him at RealSecretJake. So real quick, I'm going to go through all my housekeeping stuff. If you want to join the conversation, include the hashtag ThinkPPC in your Twitter tweets or use the webinar question box for questions. We will have a live Q&A at the end. As soon as you think of them, go ahead and put them in there, and we'll get to as many as we can. For those of you that have been with us the entire series, this is the last time you have to hear me talk about Hannafin today. So at Hannafin, we are a industry-leading digital marketing agency that manages and optimizes clients' paid search, paid social, and display programs. We run the world's most popular PPC blog, PPC Hero, and conference, HeroConf, which we'll talk just a little bit more about at the end here. And here's a quick look at all the clients that we work with. Also, if you have not downloaded them yet, Loyola. We have 3 handouts in the handout section that is located right there on your control panel. 34 Excel tricks, the ultimate guide to Excel for PPC, and using Excel Solver for budgeting. So those are free resources for you. Go ahead and download those straight from your control panel. All right, we have a real quick poll question. So how often do you run projections? Daily, weekly, monthly, quarterly, or yearly, or never, and you just don't care? All right, so Secret Jake, while they are filling out that poll question, how often do you run projections?
Oh, that's a tough one. Just the way I work, sometimes it feels like I'm running them every hour, and sometimes it feels like they just don't pop up. So I would put it, let's just round up to daily and say close to daily in some form or another. It's not every day where you have to readjust your budget, things like that. But you know, some of the tools we're going to talk about today are a good way to not just look at budget, but maybe clicks, conversions, other things. And we'll eventually circle back on the end and say, you know, you don't just use these tools for projections. You can also use them just to make sense of what's going on and see, you know, is this realistic? Are we on the right track? Just get a better feel of what's going on in your account.
Perfect. Let's see what the audience said. All right, it looks like majority are running their projections quarterly or yearly. A good chunk of you said that never, or you don't care. I assume you care at least a little bit because you're here right now. And then lower end for daily and weekly, 26% of monthly. Okay, great. All right, so without further ado, Secret Jake, take it away.
All right, let's roll into this. It sounded like I interrupted some good questions on Elena's part, so I'm feeling the pressure to make it up to everybody. But hopefully we'll walk away with some cool tools and we'll get through this together. So what brings up questions or projections and trying to go down this path? You know, it's quite a few people, but never. A lot of weekly and monthly. Just before we start, I mean, that's kind of expected. Especially if you're more maybe not the hands-on or not the straight like analytics and analysis part. You don't really need to worry about these on, let's say, such like a tactical basis. It's more of saying, hey, what's happening on this week or quarter, and are we actually going to hit those goals, or are we aligned with that? But the dreaded questions, at least on my end, come up if someone's asking because someone comes to an analyst because things aren't going right in the account, things are going wrong, going sideways, or they just aren't sure how to solve it. So we go and say, what would performance look like if we try to maximize impressions? What if our CTRs change next month? Or what these tables are going to be really useful for us, what would happen over the next quarter or month if our impression share changed by negative 15% or plus 15%? And all of these sound like relatively straightforward questions, but it's one that, especially if you aren't sure what to do, it's kind of easy to kind of just come up with your head and ballpark it and say, okay, maybe this would happen. But while that works for making some of those decisions, like if you're just in a meeting, you need to say, okay, well, this is what would happen, and this is how we would respond. It doesn't really give you a good benchmark or a number to work off of or something, because there are times when those numbers matter and those have an influence on your choices in the future. So how much you're spending, how much revenue you're bringing in can dictate what you're doing with your advertising in the future, or how you are shifting those budgets back and forth. So step away from the abstract and dig in a little bit. So why would you use a data table? A data table allows you to quickly calculate a range of values. It removes the need to calculate calculate these values manually and help better outline multiple scenarios. So you've probably done it yourself, and you've created a table, and you've made a bunch of cell references and things like that. And this does something similar, but the upside of the data table we mentioned, it's built into Excel, and it just keeps everything nice and tidy. One of the things that can come up with projections is sometimes you aren't necessarily running them for right now. You're running them, you're running your numbers, and it either goes to someone else or it sits on your hard drive for a little bit. You revisit it a little bit later. Well, especially if you have a lot of experience, you can do lots of cell references, everything like that, and it makes sense in the moment. Sometimes looking back, it just gets real confusing. You aren't sure what you're doing. I'm trying to figure out the exact quote, but this is more going into programming, but it was one about commenting your code when you're writing code, because you might submit that homework assignment and say, God and I at the time were the only ones who know what's going on with this code. It's just nonsense. It's just a bunch of numbers at this point. So getting started, let's start off super easy. If you want to find the data tables, all you have to do is go to your data tab on your ribbon and look for the what if analysis, and then there's going to bring up that little drop down with scenario manager, goals seek, and data tables, and we're going to use data tables. So simple, right? You just click a button. But when you actually set it up, it's wouldn't say any sleights of hand, but it isn't exactly intuitive when you're setting it up the first time. So what are we doing with a single input table? We're going to use one of these when we want to change, just look at one single value, such as a change in CTR. How does that affect our total clicks or conversions? How does our change in conversion rate affect our metrics, and more? So while it's called a single input table, we'll show a few examples, but it doesn't have to be a single output. It's called single input just because you're manipulating one value. So as you're setting up the variables, we're going to use a very simple example here, one that's so simple it's almost silly. The numbers are rounded off really nice and evenly. You probably don't even need a data table to calculate the clicks based on your click-through rate like this. You know, it's all in multiples of 10. You could subtract those and figure it out in your head. But once we know the value we want to calculate, we select the variable to change, and we place that value in a single column with the desired values for that variable. So in this case, we're going to calculate the total clicks based off of our impressions using a change in our click-through rate. So what we're doing here is we're starting with 2%, let's say maybe we're expecting a drop, and then we're going up in increments of plus 5%. So that's more of a quick tip if you aren't doing something like that, is you could either hard write these in and put 2, 2.5, 3.0, or you could use a reference and just increment it up by a certain amount, which is really helpful for something like this. Let's go. Okay. Slide didn't transition on mine. All right, so when you're setting up the formula, so we know the calculation for clicks. At least in this case, with the numbers we have, we can find it by impressions by click-through rate. And what we're going to do is towards the top of our table, above the column where we're going to put our output, we're going to put the formula we want to use. And if you aren't familiar with it, I think it came up in some of the previous sessions. If you're curious, you know, why doesn't it say C6 times C7? What we're using there is using a named range, and that can be another really helpful tip. If you aren't using those, go ahead and use those. It makes it really easy to see what you're referencing. So here we're referencing the impressions times click-through rate to get our formula. And once we have that filled in, we can go to the next step. So now, once we have that, what you want to do is outline your table or highlight it. So here it goes from E4 to F10. That's where we have all our input columns and our output columns. And you're going to highlight that and then go back to that data ribbon and select the data table function. And it's going to bring up this pop-up menu that you see here with the data table. And this is where it can get tricky, but not too tricky, is you have a row input cell and a column input cell. And for a single table like this, we're going to use the column input cell because, well, the easy way to think about it would be that our variables are stacked in a column. I know for me, my first impulse was to go to the row input because we're putting the data out across rows. But since the data we're referencing is a column, we're going to use the column, and in a few examples later, we'll show how to use that row. And so the output will come out, and you know, I mentioned the simple numbers. We can look at that and say, okay, that's correct. Excel will calculate these numbers, and what it does is, so we put that formula in, I believe that's F3 or 4 on there, where you see that highlighted 2500. That's our value right now, and that's the formula we're using. But what Excel does is it basically drags that formula down, and then it replaces the data column, so our column E, it replaces those values with C7 in our original formula. So rather than being 100,000 times 2.5%, it goes down and says 100,000 times 2%, 2.5, 3, 4, and up to 5. So we go in there, so what happens, if you click in your table, you're going to see it has this equals table with the cell reference. All that's telling you is it's using that table functionality, and for that reason, sometimes depending on your version of Excel, it throws errors and gets a little buggy if you try and edit inside the cell itself. So don't worry if you see that. It's intentional like that just to keep the integrity of that table once it's built. The other thing to keep in mind is once you have the table built, it's kind of like any other formula. So as we look down column E, if we decide, hey, I'd rather go in increments of 0.25 or go in increments of 1, you go in there and it'll automatically update those numbers for you. So based on the input you're using, it'll change those numbers. It can be really helpful for playing with different scenarios if you decide to use that scenario manager to change your inputs. Another one would be maybe you want to base this off of your data. I know in the last few examples, they would have like VLOOKUPs and index match and things like that. So right here, we use this really simple example and said, hey, I'm just going to go from 2 to 5. But what if I want to play it out and say, what would happen in my account? Let's pull data over the last 90 days and look at our I'm gonna roll that back just to make that scenario make a little more sense. Roll it back over last year or so for this campaign or keywords or whatever we're looking at, and over that period, use the formulas and grab our min and max CTRs for that period, so we know what the historical performance varied between them, and then run those numbers that way. So rather than kind of coming up with these numbers yourself, you're saying, okay, so based off past performance, what range would we expect? So one of the things that came up, I mentioned that it's a single input table, but it's not a single output table. So as you look at right here, what we're doing, and this is if you start looking these up in Google and looking at data tables, you're going to see a lot of this in accounting, a lot of data tables in accounting, and they use these types of models where you have a lot of other values that depend on those variables you're using. So this one right here, it's using our CPC example and then calculating our profit, our revenue, and cost. So we're still using a single input for our CPC, but it's spitting out the values for F, G, and H. So it basically gives you that extra information that you can use to make those decisions. Because like the last one we mentioned, it's a silly example. What are you going to do with the total number of clicks? Of course, the clicks, the reason you want the clicks is going to turn in conversions, and conversions turn into revenue or leads or whatever metric you're looking at. As long as using, as well as using like CPCs, you know how much it's going to cost at different levels. So you would set this up the exact same way. You would just highlight this time columns F through H, and then you would still go ahead and reference those top cells like you would before. So what if you want to use two variables? Because a lot of times in PPC, digital marketing, anything that falls under the umbrella, you're really curious to see how two variables interact with one another. So the example we're going to go over is how would ad testing and CRO impact our revenue, as well as you can answer those other questions we mentioned impression share earlier. So how would market changes lead to different return on ad spend levels? So projecting based on two variables, very similar to the last one, except this time, instead of just having some of our values in a column, we're going to build horizontally the second variable. So here we have CVR, and sometimes it's not the most common way to abbreviate it, but that's conversion rate, and our CTR. And what we did here is we took our current click-through rate and conversion rate, and then we went minus 20% and plus 30% on these rows, just to outline what would happen at different points, because as we're testing these, it's a very real possibility that some of our tests are going to fail, so we're going to see negative results, but you want to see, okay, so what if we do have a bad ad test and our click-through rate's down by 10%? What if we have a good conversion rate test and let's say it's really good and our performance improves by 20% of the conversion rate? What does the revenue actually look like at that point? Because we're losing in some areas but gaining in others, and is that something we can live with? So what you're going to do is, rather than just inputting your formula at the top of the column, the easy way to think of this, put it at the intersection of your row and column. So if you look right there, it's F6 for average. For revenue, we have impressions times the click-through rate times the conversion rate times the average order value to get our total revenue for this model. And then what you're going to do is you're going to select the entire cell, and just as before, we're going to input our column input cell in there. So this one, it's C9 to refer to our conversion rate. And in our row input cell, we're going to reference our click-through rate, because that's what we have going along the horizontal axis of our table. So once you have those in, we input those values, and it kicks out the revenue figures. So the next thing here is we can see, okay, so based off current performance over this period, let's say it's a month, we had $23,911 in revenue. But based off of this, we could see, so if we get 10% gains in both, it comes out to, we'll move, say, an extra $6,000 in revenue. Whereas if we somehow just lose on both of these tests, our click-through rates are going down, our conversion rates are going down, we're going to drop all the way to 1,500. So while these tables won't always tell you what you should do, because the one thing you have to figure in here is how likely is each of these scenarios. It's probably not likely that you're going to get plus 30%, plus 30%. It's probably going to be somewhere in the middle of this table. So just be conscious of the values you're choosing here and what you want to do. And like I said, it's not necessarily going to tell you what you should do, but it'll give you a range of those ideas of what could possibly happen. And you can say, okay, well, as long as we finish, let's say, as long as we don't drop between 10% on our click-through rate and 10% on our conversion rate, we'll still be okay to hit our goals. Looking at that, going to come up a little short of 19.5. Let's pretend that's our hypothetical goal, but we can live with it, and the ad testing is worth the long-term gains to keep moving forward. So I mentioned earlier that data tables can be really helpful for sense making. So rather than just looking at a projection and saying, let's lay out a few different variables and see what happens, you can just say, so what if we changed our variables here? Could we ever hit certain thresholds? So what you're looking at here on this table is we use conversion rate and average order value. How this came up, just to explain the scenario, is there was an account and they were looking and said, long term, I really want this account to be at a 40 times return on ad spend. It really needs to be there. I would be okay with 20 in the short term, but we really need to find a way to turn this around and really increase that. So if you're looking at the table up here, we're looking at our non-brand performance. Our current return on ad spend is 4.3, which is a very far cry from that 40 and is a really big jump up to that 20. So what we did with this table is said, rather than select realistic values, let's just outline this and say, what would be a moonshot? If you could increase your average order value by 150% and your conversion rate by 200%, you would practically be printing money, and I guess you wouldn't even really need this data table. It wouldn't be a problem for you. You'd just make it happen, click your fingers and have it. But as we outlined it here, it really is kind of that moonshot, because doing this over a month or a few months, especially if it's like a mature business or not just something where you're just starting out trying to figure out how to get those sales, that's a big, big jump on how you make that happen. So as we look at here and we say, okay, so even if we had our conversion rate go up by 200% or average order value go up by 150%, our current non-branded performance would still be 12.8, which is well shy of the 20. So if you have this in hand, it's just that nice little piece of proof that you can go back to whoever you're talking to and say, okay, so where is this 20 or 40 coming from? Because at our current numbers right now, we aren't going to hit that. And then that's where you start to go back into your account and say, okay, is there a way we could drop our CPCs or something like that? Because that's one of the ways we can kind of drop our cost while hopefully not losing revenue and make it up that way. But otherwise, it's, you just say, okay, so we can't hit 20, but what would be the next likely scenario? Or looking at this, we talked about, okay, so let's say we're doing a really, really good job and we get our conversion rate up by 40% over the year and our average order value up by 10%, and we get there and we say, okay, so we could potentially break 6 this year. And otherwise, I guess in the disaster scenario, they say that's not good enough and everyone feels sad and there's no reconciling this. So the key takeaways. So to making better projections, it's always consider a range of outcomes and scenarios. You've probably used a lot of these formulas before to make your own projections over time. But what you want to do is take away from this is just use that range, because whatever formula you're using, it's never going to be perfect. And you want to use these data tables to show multiple outcomes. You should always treat your projections as a loose prediction, because your predictions or projections may guide your decisions, but they can't guarantee your results. And sad as it was to show those examples and say, we won't hit 20 or 40, or our conversion rate or CTR could drop, it's a very realistic scenario that you want to account for in your planning, because the worst thing you could do is plan on massively growing and growing and growing and then not hit it and have to figure out what you're going to do further down the road.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Secret Jake, for a great presentation. We're going to get to the live Q&A in just a sec. So real quick, I'm going to tell you guys about HeroConf and then also give you a different offer than what you have gotten previously if you've been on our other sessions. So HeroConf is the largest all PPC conference in the world, paid search, paid social, display, programmatic, mobile. A lot of great speakers, really awesome event, and we will have a specific Excel workshop at HeroConf LA. So that is in the middle of April, April 18th through the 20th. Check it out. Go to heroconf.com and click the LA section. All right, and we have an offer. So this is a little bit different offer. So a solutions blueprint is it's a free custom analysis for companies and brands that spend $15K per month in ad spend. So one of Hannafin's experts looks in your account, compares the structure and results to industry standards. So this is really great for an in-house PPC team. It's a great chance to double check your work with a fresh set of eyes. I believe, Secret Jake, have you done one of these solutions blueprints before?
Quite often.
Quite often. I think a few of our analysts have. So if you're interested in that, we'll leave it up for just a bit. Go ahead and click that I'd like an account analysis from Hannafin. If not, click no thanks. All right, let's go on to the live Q&A. And we will get to as many of these questions as we can with the time that we have left. So, Secret Jake, which one do you want to tackle first?
We're starting to roll in, and oddly, there are multiples. So why are you called Secret Jake? Before we get into it, say, I am, apparently I'm very strange in the fact that I go by Jake or Jacob. I introduce myself as Jacob to everybody, but a lot of people call me Jake. And one time during an interview process, I said, hey, I'm Jake instead of Jacob, and everyone kind of went, what? He's been Jake the whole time. He's secretly been Jake. I don't know why I don't know. It doesn't bug me. It bugs some people. Yeah. So let's look. So what should... Okay, so, I'm hesitating because it's a good question. So what should we input considering a cause and effect situations to boost our conversions? Should I use the conversion results as an input? So if you were boosting it off of that, now that I read it out, I feel like this is one of those where I'm like, I just need to sit down and talk about this. So you could use your conversion results as an input, and that maybe would be, depending on what you're doing here, saying, okay, so we have our current conversions as an input. Based on our conversion rate, how would that impact it? Some numbers like that, or it could be you could use your conversions as an input if you're trying to calculate your revenues and everything like that. So I felt like that wasn't the best answer, but hopefully it gets you pointed in the right direction. So one would be, where are the average order value informations coming from? So there's a few ways you could do that. One is just, should it come from the clients? It depends on what client you're working with. So a lot of the times when I'm getting the average order value, I'm pulling it either from AdWords or analytics and using the conversion value divided by the number of conversions to get the average order value. The other way you could go, so if they just, if a lot of their sales are on the back end for some reason they're tracking into analytics, that is kind of one you could use you could get it from a client, especially for sometimes lead gen, if they're selling like contracts or something like that. I've worked with a few clients who do outsourced IT or call centers, and they have average contract values because it's a long sales cycle. It's really hard to say what each one is worth each time, so you can use an average order value in there as a substitute and say the value falls somewhere in between there. Interestingly enough, I was doing this with HeroConf tickets the other week, so that's another use case for this.
All right, and that last question I believe I can answer is, will you have access to these slides in the recording? So yes, we will send out the recording as well as all the slides from today's series on this Friday. So you will get access to those via email. All right, everybody. we have concluded our first Excel series. Thank you everybody for sticking around with us, and we hope that you enjoyed this series and got a lot out of it. Because this is the first time that we are doing this, we'd love to hear your feedback, whether via Twitter or through our email address there, marketing@hanfordmarketing.com. Is this something that you enjoyed? Is there something you would do different? Is there another topic, such as social or remarketing or whatnot, that you would love to see a series done like this? So if you have any input like that, please feel free to email us or to tweet at us. All right. Thank you, Jake, for your presentation. Thank you, everybody, for joining us, and we will chat with you later. Bye.